March 15, 1944, 2:30 a.m. above the industrial heartland of the Ruhr Valley. The darkness was absolute, a black canvas that German night fighter pilots had claimed as their exclusive domain for nearly 5 years of war. Through the cockpit of her Messerschmitt Bf 110, Hauptmann Elena Hoffmann scanned the star-filled sky with practiced confidence. For months she had been the queen of these midnight skies, intercepting British Lancaster bombers with deadly precision. Her tally stood at 23 heavy bombers destroyed, each victory earned in the unforgiving realm of night combat where split-second decisions meant the difference between triumph and death. What Elena didn't know was that above her, invisible against the stars, something entirely new was hunting, something the Luftwaffe had never encountered before. Something that would transform night warfare forever and shatter every assumption about who truly owned the darkness. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The year 1944 marked a pivotal moment in the European night skies. For German pilots like Elena, nighttime had become their sanctuary, their realm of dominance, where superior training and innovative radar technology gave them overwhelming advantages. The Royal Air Force's Bomber Command had been bleeding aircraft and crews at unsustainable rates during their nighttime raids over German industrial targets. British Lancaster and Halifax bombers, massive four-engine giants carrying tons of explosives, had become sitting ducks for German night fighters equipped with cutting-edge radar systems and devastating cannon armament. The mathematics of night combat heavily favored the defenders who knew their territory intimately and could operate from prepared airfields with ground-controlled intercept radar, guiding them to their prey. Elena Hoffmann represented the elite of German night fighter aviation. Born in Munich in 1919, she had defied every convention of her era by pursuing military aviation when women were expected to remain in traditional roles. Her exceptional night vision, lightning-fast reflexes, and intuitive understanding of three-dimensional combat in complete darkness had earned her recognition as one of the most feared night fighter pilots in the Luftwaffe. Flying from her base at Venlo in the Netherlands, she commanded respect from male colleagues who initially dismissed her capabilities, but soon learned to fear her tactical brilliance. Her Messerschmitt Bf 110G4 bristled with advanced Liechtenstein radar equipment and 4 devastating 20mm cannons capable of shredding heavy bombers with short, precise bursts. The German night fighter force had evolved into a sophisticated killing machine by early 1944. Ground-based radar stations tracked incoming British bomber streams from the moment they crossed the English Channel, calculating their altitude, speed, and probable targets. This information flowed to control centers where experienced controllers guided individual night fighters toward interceptions with clinical precision. The system worked with terrifying efficiency. German night fighters were claiming nearly 10% of all British bombers on major raids, losses that threatened to make the strategic bombing campaign unsustainable. Pilots like Elena had perfected techniques for approaching bombers from below and behind, exploiting blind spots in their defensive armament while using their own radar to maintain contact in complete darkness. The psychological advantage belonged entirely to the Germans during these midnight encounters. British bomber crews flew through hostile skies, knowing that death could approach silently from any direction without warning. German night fighters could stalk their prey for minutes, positioning themselves perfectly before opening fire with devastating effect. The terror of flying through German airspace at night was legendary among Allied aircrew. Many experienced pilots reported nightmares about being hunted through the darkness by invisible predators, whose first indication of presence was often the flash of cannon fire tearing through their aircraft. Elena and her colleagues had turned night interception into a deadly art form that seemed unbeatable. But in the secret research facilities and testing grounds of the United States, a revolutionary new aircraft was nearing combat readiness. The Northrop P-61 Black Widow represented everything the Germans never expected to encounter in night combat. Unlike anything previously attempted in aviation history, this twin-engine, twin-boom fighter had been designed from the ground up specifically for night interception missions. Every aspect of its design prioritized the unique requirements of darkness warfare: advanced radar systems, heavy armament, exceptional stability for precision shooting, and most importantly, the endurance to hunt throughout the longest nights. What made the P-61 truly revolutionary wasn't just its technology, but its operational philosophy that would fundamentally challenge German assumptions about night combat. The Black Widow's development began in 1940, when the United States Army Air Forces recognized the urgent need for a dedicated night fighter capable of protecting American cities and strategic targets from potential enemy bombing raids. Traditional day fighters lacked the radar equipment, endurance, and specialized systems necessary for effective night interception. The Northrop Corporation, led by visionary designer Jack Northrop, proposed an entirely new approach to night fighter design. Rather than adapting existing aircraft for darkness operations, they would create a purpose-built hunter of the night skies. The resulting aircraft incorporated cutting-edge technology that would give American pilots unprecedented advantages in nocturnal combat. Advanced radar technology formed the heart of the P-61's revolutionary capabilities. The SCR-720 airborne intercept radar system could detect enemy aircraft at distances exceeding 4 miles, far beyond the range of German Liechtenstein equipment. More importantly, the American radar provided precise tracking information that allowed P-61 pilots to maintain contact with targets while maneuvering into optimal attack positions. The radar operator, seated behind the pilot, could guide intercepts with scientific precision, while the pilot concentrated on flying and combat tactics. This division of responsibilities multiplied the effectiveness of each crew member, and created tactical possibilities that single-seat German night fighters couldn't match. The P-61's armament was designed to deliver overwhelming firepower in the brief moments when night combat targets presented themselves. 4 20mm Hispano cannons mounted in the aircraft's belly could fire 750 rounds per minute each, creating a devastating cone of destruction capable of destroying any German aircraft with a few seconds of accurate fire. Additionally, a dorsal turret containing 4 .50 caliber machine guns provided defensive capability and additional offensive firepower for engaging multiple targets. The combination of heavy cannon and rapid-fire machine guns gave P-61 pilots the ability to engage any enemy aircraft with confidence, from nimble single-engine fighters to massive transport aircraft. Flight characteristics, specifically optimized for night operations, set the Black Widow apart from every other fighter aircraft of its era. The twin-boom configuration provided exceptional stability during precision gunnery, while the tricycle landing gear simplified ground operations in darkness when pilot visibility was severely limited. The aircraft's large size allowed for extensive fuel capacity, enabling patrol missions lasting over 4 hours, far longer than any German night fighter could remain airborne. This endurance advantage meant that P-61s could maintain continuous coverage over critical targets, while German defenders were forced to land, refuel, and coordinate replacement aircraft. Perhaps most significantly, the P-61 incorporated advanced electronic countermeasures that could detect German radar transmissions and provide early warning of enemy night fighters in the area. While German pilots like Elena relied on ground control to guide them toward targets, P-61 crews could operate independently, using their superior radar and electronic systems to hunt German night fighters on their own terms. This capability would prove devastating to German defensive tactics that depended on coordination between ground controllers and airborne interceptors. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Training American night fighter crews for P-61 operations represented a massive undertaking that emphasized the unique psychological and technical demands of darkness warfare. Unlike day fighter pilots who relied primarily on visual references and instinctive maneuvering, night fighter crews needed to master complex radar operation, instrument flying in zero visibility conditions, and coordination between pilot and radar operator under extreme stress. The training program developed specialized techniques for night gunnery, target identification in darkness, and electronic navigation that German pilots had never encountered. Most importantly, American crews trained to operate as aggressive hunters rather than defensive interceptors, seeking out enemy aircraft throughout German-controlled airspace rather than waiting for targets to approach predetermined positions. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell represented the new generation of American night fighter pilots preparing to challenge German dominance of the midnight skies. Born in Portland, Oregon in 1922, she had learned to fly on her father's crop-dusting aircraft before joining the Women's Auxiliary Ferrying Squadron in 1943. Her exceptional spatial awareness and calm decision-making under pressure caught the attention of night fighter training instructors who recognized her potential for the demanding requirements of darkness combat. After intensive training on P-61 systems and tactics, she was assigned to the 422nd Night Fighter Squadron preparing for deployment to European combat zones. The psychological preparation for night combat proved as important as technical training for American crews. Unlike German pilots who operated over familiar territory with ground control assistance, P-61 crews would be hunting deep in enemy airspace where any mistake could result in capture or death. The isolation of night combat, fighting alone in darkness hundreds of miles from friendly forces, required exceptional mental toughness and confidence in aircraft systems. Sarah and her radar operator, Technical Sergeant Maria Rodriguez from San Antonio, Texas, spent hundreds of hours perfecting their coordination and communication procedures until they operated as a seamless team capable of split-second decisions in life-or-death situations. Advanced night vision techniques gave American crews significant advantages over German pilots, who relied primarily on artificial illumination and radar guidance for target identification. P-61 training emphasized preserving natural night vision through proper lighting procedures, recognizing aircraft silhouettes in minimal light conditions, and using radar information to supplement, rather than replace visual references. These techniques, combined with superior American radar technology, created tactical advantages that German night fighter pilots had never faced. For the first time, German aircraft would be hunted by opponents who could see them clearly, while remaining virtually invisible themselves. The strategic implications of P-61 deployment extended far beyond individual combat engagements. German night fighter success had been based on controlling the timing and location of aerial encounters through ground-based radar coordination and intimate knowledge of local geography. P-61s operating deep in German airspace would force defensive fighters to respond to American initiatives rather than executing their own tactical plans. The psychological impact on German pilots accustomed to hunting helpless bomber crews would be profound when they found themselves being hunted by aggressive, well-equipped opponents, operating on equal terms in the darkness they had previously controlled exclusively. As spring 1944 approached, the final preparations for P-61 combat deployment accelerated with urgent intensity. German night fighter effectiveness had reached peak levels, threatening to make British strategic bombing campaigns prohibitively expensive in aircraft and crew losses. The Royal Air Force desperately needed relief from the mounting casualties inflicted by expert German pilots like Elena Hoffmann, who had turned night interception into a deadly science. What the Germans didn't realize was that their period of unchallenged dominance was about to end dramatically. Intelligence reports reaching German night fighter headquarters indicated increasing American interest in night operations, but Luftwaffe leadership dismissed the threat as minimal. American pilots were considered inexperienced in night combat compared to German veterans with years of successful operations. The technological superiority of German radar systems and the tactical advantages of operating over familiar territory seemed to guarantee continued German control of nighttime airspace. This confidence would soon prove to be a fatal miscalculation that would cost Elena Hoffmann and her colleagues their lives. The first P-61 Black Widows began arriving at forward bases in England during March 1944. Their distinctive twin-boom silhouettes unfamiliar to ground crews accustomed to conventional fighter aircraft. Maintenance personnel received intensive training on the complex radar systems, electronic equipment, and specialized armament that made these aircraft unique in the Allied inventory. Most importantly, security measures surrounded P-61 operations to prevent German intelligence from learning about American night fighter capabilities before they could be demonstrated in combat. For German night fighter pilots like Elena, the final weeks of their dominance passed quietly, with continued successful interceptions of British bomber formations. Her confidence remained absolute, based on months of consistent victories against opponents who seemed helpless in the darkness she commanded. The advanced radar systems, devastating armament, and tactical superiority that had made her the terror of British bomber crews appeared unshakable. What she couldn't know was that across the English Channel, American crews like Sarah Mitchell and Maria Rodriguez were completing their final training flights, preparing to challenge every assumption about who truly owned the night skies over Europe. The stage was set for a confrontation that would transform night warfare forever and demonstrate that technological innovation, superior training, and aggressive tactics could overcome any defensive advantage. The Black Widows were coming, and German night fighter pilots who had ruled the darkness unchallenged for years were about to discover that they were no longer the apex predators of the midnight skies. April 2, 1944, 11:47 p.m. above the Ruhr Valley near Mannheim. The first operational P-61 Black Widow mission was about to make history in ways that would forever change the psychology of night warfare. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell adjusted her oxygen mask and checked her instrument panel one final time as her radar operator, Technical Sergeant Maria Rodriguez, fine-tuned the SCR-720 radar system that would guide them through the darkness ahead. Their mission was simple in concept but revolutionary in execution: penetrate deep into German-controlled airspace and actively hunt the night fighters that had been terrorizing Allied bomber crews for months. Unlike every previous Allied night operation that focused on defensive tactics, this mission would demonstrate American offensive capabilities that German pilots had never imagined possible. The transformation from hunted to hunter represented a fundamental shift in night combat philosophy that would prove devastating to German defensive strategies. For years, Luftwaffe night fighters had operated with complete tactical initiative, choosing when and where to engage Allied aircraft while enjoying the security of familiar territory and ground control assistance. The arrival of P-61s would reverse this dynamic entirely, forcing German pilots to react to American initiatives while dealing with superior technology and aggressive tactics they had never encountered. The psychological impact would prove as important as the tactical advantages, undermining the confidence that had made German night fighter pilots so effective against helpless bomber crews. Sarah's route took her Black Widow deep into the heart of German industrial territory, where Hauptmann Elena Hoffmann and her colleagues had been achieving their greatest successes against British bombing raids. The irony was profound. American hunters were now stalking the very airspace where German predators had felt most secure. The advanced navigation equipment aboard the P-61 allowed Sarah to fly precise courses through heavily defended areas while remaining invisible to German radar systems that were designed to detect large bomber formations rather than single stealthy fighters approaching from unexpected directions. The technical superiority of American night fighting equipment became apparent immediately as Maria's radar began detecting German aircraft at ranges that German pilots couldn't match with their own systems. The SCR-720 radar painted a clear picture of the tactical situation, showing multiple contacts that were undoubtedly German night fighters positioning themselves for interceptions of a British bomber stream approaching from the west. What made this moment revolutionary was that for the first time, German night fighters were being observed and tracked by opponents who remained completely invisible to them. The hunters had become the hunted, and they didn't even know it yet. Elena Hoffmann was conducting what she expected to be another routine interception mission, guided by ground control toward a formation of British Lancasters that appeared to be heading for the synthetic oil plants near Frankfurt. Her Messerschmitt Bf 110 climbed steadily through the darkness, its Liechtenstein radar sweeping the sky ahead for the distinctive signatures of heavy bombers. The confidence that had carried her through 23 successful interceptions remained absolute. German night fighting tactics had proven so effective that she had no reason to expect this mission would be different from dozens of previous victories. The possibility that she was being stalked by an invisible predator never crossed her mind. The P-61's advanced electronic countermeasures gave Sarah and Maria unprecedented awareness of German tactical movements. They could monitor Luftwaffe radio communications, track the emissions from German radar systems, and observe the coordination between ground controllers and airborne interceptors that formed the backbone of German night defense. This intelligence advantage allowed them to predict German movements and position themselves for optimal attacks while remaining completely undetected. The technological gap between American and German night fighting capabilities had become so vast that the outcome of any encounter was predetermined before German pilots even knew they were being engaged. Sarah's first target presented itself as Elena's Messerschmitt climbed through 15,000 feet, silhouetted against a thin layer of clouds that provided perfect contrast for visual identification. The irony was complete. Elena was hunting British bombers, while being hunted herself by an American fighter she couldn't detect. The predator had become prey, and the reversal would prove fatal. Sarah's years of training in aggressive night fighting tactics had prepared her for exactly this type of engagement, where superior technology and tactical surprise could overcome any advantage in experience or local knowledge. The attack developed with clinical precision that demonstrated American tactical superiority in every aspect of night combat. Maria's radar provided continuous tracking information, while Sarah maneuvered into the optimal firing position below and behind Elena's aircraft. The German pilot remained focused on her own radar display, searching for bomber targets while completely unaware of the death approaching from her blind spot. This moment crystallized the transformation of night warfare. German pilots who had dominated through technological advantage were now facing opponents with superior technology and superior tactics. Elena's final moments illustrated the complete reversal of fortune that P-61 deployment represented for German night fighter operations. Her first indication of danger came when 20mm cannon shells began tearing through her aircraft's fuselage, destroying critical systems and mortally wounding her radar operator. The attack came from a direction her own radar couldn't monitor, delivered by an aircraft she had never seen, using tactics she had never encountered. In seconds, the confident predator had become a helpless victim, experiencing the same terror that British bomber crews had endured for months under similar attacks from German night fighters. The destruction of Elena's Messerschmitt marked more than the loss of a single aircraft and crew. It represented the end of German invincibility in night combat, and the beginning of a new era where American technology and tactics would systematically eliminate the Luftwaffe's most experienced night fighter pilots. The psychological impact extended far beyond the immediate tactical situation. Other German pilots monitoring radio communications heard Elena's desperate final transmissions, describing an attack by an unknown aircraft type that had appeared without warning and disappeared just as quickly after delivering devastating firepower. Sarah's successful engagement demonstrated every advantage that P-61 operations would bring to the night war over Europe. Superior radar range had allowed detection and tracking of German aircraft while remaining invisible to enemy systems. Advanced electronic countermeasures had provided complete tactical awareness of German movements and intentions. Devastating firepower had enabled quick, clean kills that minimized exposure to enemy defensive fire. Most importantly, the ability to operate independently deep in enemy territory had brought the war directly to German pilots who had previously felt secure in their own airspace. The strategic implications of P-61 operations extended far beyond individual combat successes to threaten the entire foundation of German night defense strategy. Luftwaffe tactics depended on ground-controlled interception that required German fighters to operate in predictable patterns while approaching designated intercept points. P-61s hunting freely throughout German airspace would force defensive pilots to constantly check their surroundings for threats rather than concentrating on their own. Offensive missions. The psychological burden of being hunted while hunting would prove impossible for German crews to sustain over time. Word of Elena's destruction spread quickly through German night fighter units, creating unprecedented concern among pilots who had previously considered themselves the masters of darkness warfare. The loss of such an experienced and successful pilot to an unknown American aircraft type represented a fundamental challenge to German assumptions about night combat superiority. Intelligence officers struggled to understand how American fighters had achieved such devastating effectiveness in their first operational mission, while pilots began questioning whether their traditional tactics remained viable against this new threat. The success of Sarah's mission triggered immediate expansion of P-61 operations throughout the European theater. Additional Black Widow squadrons received orders for immediate deployment to forward bases, where they could begin systematic hunting operations against German night fighters. The aircraft's exceptional range and endurance capabilities allowed sustained patrols over German territory that would keep defensive pilots under constant pressure while protecting Allied bombing operations through aggressive offensive action rather than passive defensive measures. German attempts to adapt their tactics to counter P-61 operations proved futile against the overwhelming technological and tactical advantages American night fighters possessed. Modifications to radar systems couldn't overcome the fundamental range limitations of German equipment. Changes to intercept patterns only made German aircraft more predictable to P-61 crews, monitoring their communications and tracking their movements. Even attempts to avoid contact by operating at different altitudes failed, because American radar could track targets throughout the entire operational envelope of German night fighters. The psychological transformation of night warfare became apparent as German pilot morale collapsed under the constant threat of being attacked by invisible enemies. Men who had entered combat as confident hunters found themselves constantly looking over their shoulders, jumping at shadows, and aborting missions at the first sign of electronic interference that might indicate American presence. The terror that British bomber crews had experienced was now being inflicted on German night fighters with compound interest, as they faced opponents who were both technologically superior and tactically aggressive. By late April 1944, P-61 operations had achieved strategic effects far beyond their tactical successes in individual engagements. German night fighter effectiveness declined dramatically as pilots became reluctant to press attacks against bomber formations that might be protected by invisible American hunters. The careful coordination between ground controllers and airborne interceptors that had made German night defense so effective began breaking down, as pilots demanded constant updates on potential P-61 positions rather than concentrating on their assigned targets. The ripple effects of American night fighter success extended throughout the German war effort, as industrial production suffered under renewed bombing pressure that overwhelmed weakened defensive capabilities. Synthetic fuel plants, aircraft factories, and transportation networks that had been protected by effective night fighter operations now faced sustained attack from bomber formations that P-61s escorted with impunity. The economic impact of American night fighter success multiplied the tactical advantages achieved through superior technology and aggressive tactics. For German pilots who survived encounters with P-61s, the experience proved psychologically devastating in ways that affected their performance in all subsequent missions. The shock of being attacked without warning by invisible opponents using overwhelming firepower created lasting trauma that interfered with the split-second decision-making essential for successful night combat. Many experienced pilots requested transfer to day fighter units rather than continue facing American night fighters that seemed to appear from nowhere and disappeared just as quickly after delivering death. The rapid expansion of P-61 operations throughout the spring of 1944 demonstrated American industrial capacity to produce game-changing weapons systems in quantities that German industry couldn't match. While individual German aircraft might possess certain technical advantages in specific areas, American mass production capabilities ensured that any German innovations would be overwhelmed by sheer numbers of superior American aircraft operated by superbly trained crews using proven tactics developed through scientific analysis of combat requirements. Sarah Mitchell's success in destroying Elena Hoffmann represented more than a personal victory or even a tactical triumph. It symbolized the transformation of American military aviation from a defensive force protecting homeland territory to an aggressive instrument of strategic warfare capable of projecting power throughout enemy airspace. The confidence and skill that American pilots demonstrated in their first night fighter missions proved that democratic societies could produce warriors every bit as effective as those trained under totalitarian systems, while enjoying technological advantages that dictatorship couldn't match. The legacy of that first P-61 mission extended far beyond World War II to influence night fighter development for decades. The principles of technological superiority, aggressive tactics, and independent operation deep in enemy territory became the foundation for American air power doctrine that would prove decisive in conflicts from Korea through the modern era. The Black Widow had proven that innovation, training, and determination could overcome any defensive advantage, establishing American dominance in night warfare that would never again be seriously challenged by any opponent. May 15, 1944, 1:23 a.m. above Stuttgart. The war in the darkness had transformed beyond recognition in just 6 weeks since Sarah Mitchell's first successful P-61 mission. What began as isolated American hunting expeditions had evolved into a systematic campaign of terror that was methodically destroying German night fighter capabilities across the entire Reich. Tonight, Captain Jennifer Walsh piloted her Black Widow through the industrial haze above southwestern Germany, her radar operator scanning for the increasingly desperate German pilots who still dared to challenge American dominance of the night skies. The Hunters had become so effective that German night fighters were now operating in small, scattered formations, abandoning the coordinated tactics that had once made them so deadly against Allied bomber streams. The psychological revolution in night warfare had created effects that extended far beyond combat statistics. German pilots who had once approached their missions with the confidence of apex predators now flew with the constant awareness that death could strike from any direction without warning. Major Klaus Weber, one of the few surviving German night fighter aces with 18 bomber kills, had requested transfer to day fighter operations rather than continue facing American P-61s that seemed to materialize from empty darkness to deliver devastating attacks before vanishing without trace. His request was denied because the Luftwaffe could no longer afford to lose experienced night fighter pilots, even those whose morale had been shattered by encounters with technologically superior opponents. The cascading effects of American night fighter dominance were reshaping German defensive strategy in ways that revealed the true strategic value of P-61 operations. Luftwaffe headquarters had been forced to disperse night fighter units across dozens of smaller airfields to prevent concentrated P-61 attacks that had been devastating major night fighter bases. This dispersal reduced the effectiveness of ground control intercept operations and made coordination between defensive units nearly impossible. German night fighters that had once operated as a cohesive defensive network were now scattered fragments, struggling to maintain even basic communication with their controllers. Jennifer's mission tonight demonstrated how completely P-61 operations had reversed the tactical initiative in night warfare. Rather than reacting to German interceptions of Allied bombers, American night fighters were now dictating the tempo and location of all nocturnal combat. Her target was a Junkers Ju-88 night fighter that intelligence indicated was piloted by Hauptmann Friedrich Müller, a veteran with 15 confirmed kills who represented the dwindling elite of German night aviation. The irony was profound. American pilots were now hunting the Hunters, seeking out individual German aces for personal destruction, rather than simply protecting bomber formations from attack. The technological gap between American and German night fighting capabilities had widened dramatically as production priorities forced the Luftwaffe to operate increasingly obsolete equipment against cutting-edge American systems. While P-61s incorporated the latest advances in radar technology, electronic countermeasures and fire control systems, German night fighters were making do with equipment that was already outdated when first installed. The German war economy's inability to maintain technological parity with American innovation meant that every engagement between P-61s and German night fighters was fundamentally unequal before it began. Friedrich Müller's Junkers Ju-88 represented the last generation of effective German night fighters, equipped with advanced Liechtenstein radar and upward-firing cannon specifically designed for attacking heavy bombers from below. His tactics had been refined through months of successful combat against British Lancaster and Halifax bombers, whose defensive armament couldn't effectively engage threats approaching from directly underneath. These same tactics that had made him so deadly against helpless bomber crews would prove utterly useless against a P-61 that could detect his aircraft long before his own radar could locate the American fighter stalking him through the darkness. The encounter that followed illustrated every advantage that American technology and training had brought to night warfare. Jennifer's radar operator detected Friedrich's Junkers at a range of 6 miles, while the German pilot remained completely unaware of the American presence. The P-61's advanced electronic systems allowed continuous tracking while Jennifer maneuvered into an optimal attack position that exploited blind spots in German radar coverage. The technological superiority was so complete that Friedrich never had a chance to defend himself or even recognize the threat before devastating cannon fire began tearing his aircraft apart. Friedrich's destruction marked more than another tactical victory for American night fighters. It represented the elimination of irreplaceable German expertise that had taken years to develop and could never be adequately replaced. Each experienced German night fighter pilot killed by P-61s took with him knowledge, skills, and tactical understanding that represented invaluable assets to the Luftwaffe's defensive capabilities. The Americans were systematically destroying not just aircraft and equipment, but the human capital that made German night fighter operations effective. The strategic implications of this targeted elimination of German night fighter expertise extended throughout the Reich's defensive structure. Training new night fighter pilots required experienced instructors who were being killed faster than they could train replacements. The few surviving German aces were being forced to fly increasingly dangerous missions to compensate for the loss of their colleagues, creating a death spiral that accelerated the collapse of German night fighter capabilities. American P-61 operations had created a self-reinforcing cycle of destruction that was methodically dismantling German defensive aviation. By summer 1944, the transformation of night warfare had become so complete that German bomber crews attempting nocturnal raids against Allied positions reported being intercepted by American fighters over their own territory. The tables had turned so dramatically that German aircraft were now experiencing the same helplessness that Allied bombers had endured during the dark days of 1943. P-61s were ranging freely throughout German airspace, hunting any target that presented itself, while maintaining complete tactical superiority through advanced technology and superior training. The human cost of this transformation extended beyond military casualties to affect the broader German war effort. Experienced night fighter pilots who had been national heroes, celebrated in propaganda for their victories against Allied bombers, were now being killed in anonymous encounters with invisible American hunters. The psychological impact on German civilian morale was devastating, as stories spread of elite Luftwaffe pilots being destroyed by opponents they never saw coming. The myth of German technological superiority was being shattered nightly by American fighters that seemed to possess almost supernatural capabilities. Technical innovations emerging from P-61 combat experience were revolutionizing night warfare in ways that would influence aviation development for decades. Advanced radar systems tested in combat were providing data that drove improvements in electronic design and tactical applications. Night vision techniques developed by American crews were being incorporated into training programs that would produce even more effective pilots. Most importantly, the integration of sophisticated electronics with aggressive tactics was establishing new paradigms for air combat that emphasized technological advantage and tactical flexibility over traditional concepts of pilot skill alone. The industrial dimension of American night fighter success demonstrated democratic society's ability to outproduce and out-innovate totalitarian opponents through superior organization and technological development. While German factories struggled to maintain production of obsolete night fighter designs, American industry was delivering improved P-61 variants with enhanced capabilities that widened the performance gap even further. The latest Black Widow models incorporated lessons learned from combat experience, making them even more deadly against German opponents who were flying essentially the same aircraft they had used a year earlier. Intelligence gathered from captured German pilots revealed the psychological devastation that P-61 operations had inflicted on Luftwaffe night fighter units. Interrogation reports described German aircrew who refused to fly missions, commanders who falsified operational reports to avoid admitting the extent of their losses, and entire squadrons that had effectively ceased functioning as combat units. The confident, aggressive pilots who had terrorized Allied bomber crews were now broken men who jumped at shadows and saw American fighters in every cloud formation. The ripple effects of German night fighter collapse were being felt throughout the Reich's war economy, as Allied bombing operations achieved unprecedented effectiveness with minimal losses. Industrial targets that had been protected by effective night fighter defenses were now being systematically destroyed by bomber formations that P-61s escorted with complete impunity. Synthetic fuel production, aircraft manufacturing, and transportation networks were crumbling under sustained bombing pressure that overwhelmed weakened German defensive capabilities. By autumn 1944, P-61 operations had achieved strategic effects that extended far beyond their original mission of protecting Allied bombers from German night fighters. American night fighters were now conducting independent offensive operations, attacking German airfields, strafing transportation targets, and destroying enemy aircraft on the ground. The Black Widow had evolved from a defensive weapon into an offensive instrument of strategic warfare that projected American power throughout German territory with devastating effectiveness. The personal stories of German pilots who survived encounters with P-61s revealed the human dimension of technological and tactical transformation. Many described the experience as fighting ghosts or battling supernatural opponents who possessed impossible capabilities. The psychological trauma of being hunted by invisible enemies using overwhelming firepower created lasting effects that interfered with their ability to function effectively in combat. Some requested transfer to ground units, rather than continue facing American night fighters that seemed to appear from nowhere and disappear just as quickly after delivering death. The legacy of P-61 operations in World War II established principles of night warfare that would influence military aviation for generations. The combination of advanced technology, aggressive tactics, and superior training had proven decisive against opponents who relied on traditional methods and outdated equipment. American success in night combat demonstrated that innovation and industrial capacity could overcome any defensive advantage, establishing patterns of technological superiority that would characterize American military aviation throughout the Cold War and beyond. For the surviving German night fighter pilots who witnessed this transformation, the experience provided sobering lessons about the dangers of underestimating technological innovation and industrial capacity. Many post-war memoirs described the shock of encountering American night fighters that possessed capabilities they had thought impossible. The confident pilots who had laughed at unescorted bombers in 1943 learned that technological superiority in warfare belongs to those who can innovate fastest and produce most effectively. The final statistics of P-61 operations tell only part of the story of how American night fighters transformed aerial warfare. Beyond the impressive kill ratios and successful mission counts lay a more fundamental achievement: the Kehrtwende, complete reversal of night combat dynamics that had favored German defenders for years. American P-61s had not simply won battles. They had won the war for control of Europe's night skies through superior technology, training, and tactical innovation that German pilots could never match or counter. The P-61 Black Widow proved that in modern warfare, victory belongs to those who can combine technological innovation with aggressive tactics and superior training to achieve overwhelming advantages over opponents who rely on traditional methods. The aircraft that German pilots never expected to encounter in their own skies had become the instrument of their destruction, demonstrating that democratic societies possess unique advantages in developing and deploying game-changing military technologies that authoritarian regimes cannot match. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.